Good evening, 50 Min, and welcome to a new market update. As we can see now here alone at this screen, we saw the biggest liquidation event ever experienced at the crypto market. To be honest, I was here at the COVID crash, I was here at the FTX, at the Luna crash, I was here last year with the crash, but this one was really different. It's crazy. We just liquidated over $20 billion within the last 24 hours, as you can see here. The largest single liquidation was an Ethereum USDT position on Hyperliquid, valued over $203 million, just got liquidated. That's insane. We never experienced something like this. And I will now explain you what happened and what to do next and why you should not blindly invest now into altcoins because it's now cheap. Let's start with the update. Let's take a closer look at the BTC movement from yesterday. As we can see here, the New York closed, everything was fine, S&P 500 closed, and to take it directly, yes, we saw a sell-off in the general S&P 500, in the general crypto market and other assets because of the new Trump tariffs against China, but I will now explain you why this wasn't because of the Trump tariffs. And yeah, the New York close was here, and we saw no big moves, as I already said, S&P 500 and gold. And after that, we saw the CME close. And after the CME close, the next tariffs got published from Trump via Truth Social. This was directly after the CME close. S&P 500 was closed, and the gold index reacted again with a bullish power. After this one, Bitcoin also moved further down because, as I already said, tariffs are not good. And so Bitcoin don't close the market, so Bitcoin reacted instantly of this. And then we had the market close, the general market close, the Dixie, the Forex, the golds, the communities, everything closed here. And after this close, things getting interesting. We see here the close, and after the close, a few minutes later, market starts to dump. We can also see here at Arbitrum, I take two altcoins into the current environment to show the picture even clearer with some altcoins. We can see here the red line was the market close here, and we can see here after that, a few minutes later, also the altcoins with Bitcoin going hand in hand further down. 20 minutes after the market close, we can see the altcoin liquidation event here. It's really impressive what here happened. We can only look here at Arbitrum. Arbitrum lost 70% within a few minutes. XRP also lost 44% in a few minutes. I mean, BTC lost also around 8%, but that's nothing compared with altcoins, to be honest. And what I think is really interesting is during the liquidation event, we saw huge up wicks and down wicks. So market participants fight really hard to come out of this sell pressure, but the market makers don't allow it. So for me, this market liquidation event, this altcoin liquidation yesterday wasn't because of the tariffs. Because as I already said, New York closed, most of the tariffs was also already priced in. After the CME close, we saw the next tariffs, how much now is coming. Market reacted, and after this reaction, we saw the actual altcoin sell-off, and in this sell-off, altcoins melts down. Over 20 billion long liquidations, over 20 billion general liquidations, with 70% only long liquidation. So for me, this liquidation event wasn't because of the tariffs and the general market situation, it was because market maker planned it. Because it's also really interesting, we saw the New York close, we saw the CME close and the market close, and after a few minutes that the market drop came in. So market makers really searched and waited for the illiquid time of the day, because it's the Friday evening before the weekend action, and it was perfect for such a liquidation event. So I don't know who was the market maker, but they made a really good work. What's also interesting to notice that we had such few insider trades. I see here such an interesting wallet that opened around 2 or 3 hours before the Trump tariffs got announced. Deposit here $30 million. As you can see here, the deposit was here 5:20 a.m. $30 million. And he instantly opened shorts at Ethereum and Bitcoin. And as we can see here, he made a quick profit from over 2x. So he made from 30 billion, over 70 billion. But that's not the last, because here is another insider who just deposited $30 million. It went up to $104 million. So you can see already here many whales was involved into this altcoin liquidation event. So for me, that's even clearer that this overall was planned. What's also interesting to note is, I don't know if you can remember, just watch the last market update from me. I talked about the total open interest and the choppy $100 billion mark. Yes, I talked if we can't overcome it, we will see a liquidation event. Yes, I expected a liquidation event, but not that we liquidate $40 billion out of the markets. And as we can see here now, the 100 billion choppy zone wasn't overcome again, and we see a drop. Now we are at $60 billion. We lost 40% of the total open interest. I warned about it, but it's really impressive what we saw here. It's really crazy. And also, if we take a look at BTC, I also talked about the important open interest support point here. Also talked about that in the last update. I talked about here, when we hit this, that we saw a sell-off at BTC, and that is really important if we can overcome it, that we also hold it. And if we are going now deeper into the markets, we can see here that once we lost this, the altcoin liquidation event also began. So this was generally mostly only because of the liquidations, and that's what I warned last week. It's really crazy what happened, but that's what I want. I warned before that we see such a huge liquidation event against the altcoins. Even if I don't expect it this much, I hope I warned you enough that you still be careful with altcoin investments. And let's start with the market update, what I expect now for BTC and Ethereum. So for me, we are still in the sideways range. Yes, we saw a significant sell-off. We also touched the 102K region, but we're still now above the 110K level. Yesterday with the sell-off, we also held the 110K. So for me, we're still in the game plan between the 110 to 120K sideways range. We also created a huge wick at BTC, because if we're going now in the 1-day chart, we can see here a huge wick, and such huge wicks will always get filled. So for me, it's only a matter of time when we are filling the wick. It's important if we fill the wick, the 50% wick or the whole wick. And the big problem here is that if we're filling the wick, we're losing the 110K level. So for me, the overall market picture don't look very bullish, because we have now the bearish imbalance below. We have the liquidation event that put trust away from the crypto markets. I mean, $20 billion within a few minutes. That's insane. And market participants also was not interested to going into crypto while stocks are running and the general other assets like gold and silver pumping to new all-time highs. And such events like this are not very helpful for this sentiment. So if we see the wick close, we will definitely go lower again. I expect the first bounce at BTC at the 50% level, and if we don't see here a bounce again to the 110K level and maybe above also, we are going for the 100% wick fill down in the 100K level. And as already described in the game plan, if we drop sustainable below the 110K level, if we're going for the wick fill, I also expect we're going for the 98K level touch. So if we are going for the wick fill, Bitcoin will enter the bearish scenario. At the moment, I don't expect another pump into the 120K level. Also, if we see it, because yesterday this sell-off here was because of the tariff news. Even if Trump now going back with the tariffs and saying, yeah, we have another agreement with Xi Jinping, I still expect on the pump above the 120K level, because the trust moment is completely destroyed in the market. So my nearest scenario is that we are filling the 50% wick, see if we can see a bounce back in the 110K level and maybe above. And if we got a retest here again, we're going for the 100% wick fill, entering the bearish scenario and also seeing the 89K level. And if we can't hold here, as already described, we are visiting the 92K area and closing the CME gap there. So that's my plan. I don't expect really much bullish power because it's really ridiculous what happened yesterday. And I don't expect also that market makers will let this wick imbalance unfilled. For Ethereum, it's looking even worse because as we can see here, we saw yesterday a really, really interesting action, to be honest. We saw this huge sell-off as I already described. Also Ethereum alone lost at this liquidation went over $6.2 billion. That's 30% of the total open interest from Ethereum. And as we can see here, we dropped into the 3.5k region, pumped again into the mid-range 4.3 region. It was really crazy in action, but now we are below the 4k region. And for me, this looks already like very sustainable below the 4k region. Also important, we created here a big wick. So for me, it looks already that Ethereum is now in the bearish scenario because we are now really below this area, but also it's important here again, we are now in a weekend range. So if we see now the wick fill and going on Monday or Tuesday below the 4k region, that would mean that we are still in the sideways range because we saw the drop and the fill doing the weekend range. But if we don't see next week a pump above the 4k, we're definitely in the bearish scenario and going for the wick fill, and will hunt the liquidations until we're in the 3k region. Yeah, it's really crazy what happened to Ethereum, to be honest. We got really destroyed here. I expect now a drop to fill the 50% wick also at BTC here, and after that we need to see, okay, can we reclaim the 4k region or are we in the bearish scenario? Altcoins are looking very, very interesting. Let's go into the total free chart. Last week I talked about that we are creating new all-time highs, making new wicks, but that's not really a bullish sign because we not overcame the area. Bitcoin wasn't still above the 120k region. We're still struggling with that, and I talked with you, if we can't overcome the 120k level sustainable, altcoins will have a huge meltdown. To be honest, as already described, I've not expected such a huge liquidation event, but my prediction was here also right. We saw a huge down move. The total free chart lost nearly over 43% of his value. So my plan worked here. I mean, it was really theoretical, but it worked. For me, this chart also don't look really bullish. We see here a huge wick. Alone this wick has over 29% and this must be filled. So I also expect here at least a 50% wick, and this would also match with a good support point here. So I can well imagine that we see here the first bounce. If we can't see the first bounce, we're also going here for the 100% wick. Such wicks like at the total free chart is everywhere now. We can see here I already put a limit ordered link at the 50% wick, the same at Ether, because I expect that these wicks are getting filled. But first I'm coming back to the BTC dominance before I explaining why I expect that we fill the wicks. The BTC dominance saw also a huge pump. Last week I compared it with BTC. If we see another drop, the BTC dominance will also rise. I mean, no more words needed. We saw the huge dump and the BTC dominance also pumped insane. So the Bitcoin dominance movement was also like expected. To be honest, this huge wick, I also expected that this wick had filled. Also because Bitcoin will fill the wick, and as I already described, if Bitcoin falls, the Bitcoin dominance will rise because more market participants will flow out of altcoins, moving their assets into BTC or in the stable coins. So I expect here another upwards movement, 50% wick, 100% wick, same game plan as a BTC and Ethereum. The also problem here is if Bitcoin really enters the bearish scenario and also Ethereum, I can well imagine higher moves and maybe again above the higher time frame region. So maybe we can see here 50%, 100%, and after this we can see the higher time frame region will work as a support again, but that will we only see when the time has come. Let's talk about now why I expect that the wicks get filled. I don't know who are here when we saw the last liquidation event in February 2025. That was a really, really interesting move. Ethereum lost over 35% within 10 minutes. This was during a illiquid Asia session back then. And as we can see here now, this wick was 25%, so really less than the wicks now. We have now wicks at LDO or ton with over 2 or 300%. So this is a very good example what I expect next also at altcoins. We saw here 25% wick. What's also interesting to notice here that we closed, if we are going now into daily chart, we closed the daily candle in green, but the last another days was poor bleed. So market makers eyeing in the liquidations, and we can see here now the 50% wick. After this we filled it, was a support point for link, but market makers back then wanted to fill the 100% wick, and after this we saw another sell-off to aim the 100% wick, as we can see here now, that also acted like a support. And if we're going now into ton, we saw also an interesting scenario here. The liquidation wick from February 2025 was here, and after this we saw a slow bleed until the wick was filled. Then we formed a support point, and the support point worked until now. So if we see really the baddest scenario also for ton, I can well imagine that we are dropping again into the $0.5 region, filling the wick, creating a support point before we are going higher. So what I want to say at the altcoins at the moment is be careful what do we invest in the moment. We see entries that we experienced since the years never, or even saw since the IPO, but that's really not the best sign. Such liquidations went, we lost over $20 billion, are now completely wiped out from market makers, from whales, from investors, from institutional interests that nuked the complete trust moment at crypto that built up since the Trump environment. Since we saw, with the Trump environment, more regulations and the Genius Act and more will come. But if we see such a huge liquidation event, this is never a bullish sign for the market. I want to see at least a 50% wick fill at nearly every altcoin. Also for Link, for INR, for Ton, because we saw huge wicks. Also at the total free chart, we saw huge wicks. This isn't a really bullish sign. So be careful what to invest now. I would also, like I did it at Link and in INR, I put a limit order into the 50% wick range. I will now see how they are reacting into these levels, because as already described in the Crypto Trade Idea channel, that this 50% wick is interesting. That is also a very strong support point at INR. So I now will take a look at those. If INR see here a huge bounce, pumping back nearly 20 or 30% or even higher, this will show me, okay, market makers are now aiming the 50% wick fill, and after this they are satisfied and saying, okay, now we filled the 50% imbalance and now we're pumping higher. If we see this now, I will aim also at other altcoins with the 50% wick. But if we don't see a bullish reaction and we're dropping into the 100% wick, I'm staying out for altcoins completely. Only until then we close the 100% wick at the altcoins that I'm interested in. That's really important to say. Such huge wicks are not bullish. There is untapped liquidity downstairs, so be careful who you follow in such times like this. Even if many people are now screaming that's the best prices we've ever seen and we need to buy this. Altcoin season could definitely come after we filled this wick, because this is a completely reset of the whole markets. But I want to see the liquidation, the wick fills in the altcoins and the general markets, because as already said, such wicks will always get filled. And only if we take a look at INR, we pumped from the low from 0.30% up to yesterday's daily close 230%. And just remember what happened with Ton and Link last year. This was a 36% wick and this was at 32% wick. So such wicks aren't really bullish. Again, just only a quick look at the Bitcoin liquidation map update. I also talked about if we don't hold the 120k region, we're dropping into 107k long liquidation cluster. Yep, this was also a very great predict, but my next plan will be also here If we can't hold the 110k region, we will dropping further down into the 90k region, where the next big long liquidation cluster is spotted. So the important fact now is also that we're here forming another huge liquidation cluster, because we saw the huge wick, many new buyers stepped into the markets and now forming further liquidations downstairs. Just to complete it again, I expect for BTC a wick close in this area. I want to see at least a 50% wick close, and after this 100% wick close. The same I expect for Ethereum. And after we see the wick close, I want to see how the reaction at the 110k level or the 4k level is. At altcoins, I also want to see a wick close at least to 50%, because the wicks are insane and there's untapped liquidity down there. And we saw the last liquidations this year, what happened at the market if we see such huge wicks. As I already said, we can see such upwards movement again, but this imbalance will hold, and I want to see it fill before I'm going more into the markets with more positions. Interesting also will be for next week. The Monday open will be very important, because the Chinese markets must react on the tariff situation. So we have tech giants like Baba, the general Chinese tech sector. We also need to see how the CME close will happen at Ethereum, Bitcoin, and maybe also Solana. And in the general, we saw at BTC after the market close and the CME close the next tariff round, so we still have another tariff impacts next week open. This will also have a huge impact, so don't be bullish. We are in the weekend action, and as already described, I'm very confident that we are filling the wicks at Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the altcoins. More updates will come in the next few days. I'm very excited for the coming week and to see how this will end up next week. And I hope I prepared you well for this scenario. I hope you waited for the altcoins, as I already described, since weeks and months in the game plan. If we can't hold the 120k resistance, altcoins will melt in the sideways range, and it perfectly happened. As I already said, I don't expect it's such a huge liquidation event, but it came true. For me, I'm now waiting for the wick fills, waiting for the current environment, and I'm hyped for next Monday open.